Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back this week. I hope you had a great weekend and were able to catch the live stream on Sunday. Just a reminder before we get into today's video that the monthly investment macro video that I talked about is now out on the private channel. So if you look below in the description, you will find the link to watch that video. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of value out of it. 1 hour long, describes everything going on right now from a macro perspective, a financial perspective, where I'm invested right now to get us through this uncertain period. So with all that said, let's now get straight into today's content. 2.5 years ago now, I started to make warning videos here on this channel about the period that we would be going into. A rather dire period, nothing positive about this period, from around 2020 right through to 2030. And I've got to say, having traveled vastly, more than 70 countries, I've seen quite a lot in my life, and the period that we're in right now is even taking me by surprise at the, I guess we can say, the extreme changes and the speed of these changes that are coming in, and just how very little resistance there is to a lot of these changes. Even, you remember, I think it was 10, 11 days ago now, I brokered the story about the Dutch farming protests. So the Dutch farmers that were protesting against the reduction of 30% of their livestock, and these huge reductions, some areas up to 95% of nitrogen fertilizers. Well, we already saw what happened in Sri Lanka when they stopped using fertilizers, and now Sri Lanka is pretty much a failed state. The country is bankrupt. It is in some severe problems. And you may think, well, surely people would be behind the Dutch protests and the media. That's just not the way it's going. In fact, I made a note here of how the media have labeled the Dutch farmers, and many of the articles are calling them right-wing farmers group with explosive levels of violence against police. Now, again, I think this is all lies. The farmers are, just because you're a farmer, it doesn't make you a right-winger, okay, or anything like this. A farmer is a farmer. We need to stop putting these labels onto people. I have the utmost, deepest respect for our farmers because I know how hard a life it is, how difficult a job it is. And without the farmers, you are not going to have food on your plate, on your table. You will not have food to feed your parents or your children. People would starve without farmers. And yet the media is victimizing farmers and calling them all these names and saying that they are deliberately trying to starve out the population by blocking food warehouses and the motorways and things like that. When, if you notice one thing the media now does, and this is, you can't even call them media, it's more propaganda, they will, whatever the truth is, they will tell you the exact opposite. So they'll spin it around and then they'll come up with all this evidence with experts to try and reinforce what their truth is. And the same goes with a lot of these, right-wing explosive violence on police by the farmers. I've actually studied these videos and I've watched these videos very carefully. And these people do not look like farmers to me. In fact, the sheer aggression of some of these guys, they don't look like farmers, let's just say that. I think they are probably crisis actors. You can't prove this sort of thing anymore, it's very difficult. But from what I've seen of the sort of social media feeds of the farming protest, it looks very peaceful. It's just people that are concerned for their livelihood, concerned for the people of their country. Look, if you start cutting fertilizers by 90%, 95% in some areas, you start culling livestock at the extreme levels being talked about. We already have a global food crisis. This isn't me saying it. This is some of the biggest organizations on the planet, including your politicians, who are saying we have a food crisis, with a lot of it sort of converging around October, November this year in 2022. Of course, this fits in with a lot of the strange periods, October, November at the end of this year, as well as the futures contracts around wheat and some of the staples. Now, not to focus too much on the farmers here and food, because I want to move on to some other key points that are going on right now, which are very worrying, and everyone should be worried about these things. So the next one then is around Russia and energy output. So Putin has actually said point blank that the energy outputs to Europe will be cut, and they'll continue to be cut unless Europe pays in rubles for the energy. Now let's get one thing clear here, because if there's one thing I hate, it's lies and people who lie. And what we're seeing, and it's really disappointing, is our politicians are lying about the energy situation with Russia. What they are saying is that Russia is flat out saying no energy for Europe. We are not giving any energy to Europe under any circumstances, etc. This is just not true. The truth of the matter is that Russia will provide energy to Europe, but Europe must pay in rubles. Why? Because of all the confiscations and the sanctions that were put on Russia, where all of their money that was in euros and dollars and other currencies was confiscated. Now look, I'm not here to get into the ethics of this. That's not my job. That's for you to make a decision. Drop your comments below what you think about all of that. But these are the facts around this. Western leaders made the decision to make sanctions on Russia and steal their money as, I guess, a protest for what's happening in Ukraine. But remember, there was no court, there was no legal process around those sanctions. Western governments just decided to do it. But the point of the matter is that Russia's now said, we will not accept euros, dollars, anything else, because they will simply be stolen from us. So we only want rubles. Now, the Western leaders have said they won't pay in rubles because they don't want to fuel what's going on in Ukraine. So instead, Russia is exporting their energy to India and to China and to other what they consider to be friendly countries. So this is actually what's happening with the state of energy. It's not simply a case that Russia's just said, we're not going to give Europe any energy. We want to cripple the economies of Europe and USA and the West in general. The sanctions are what are crippling the country. And Biden even was asked about this recently, as well as Boris Johnson and some other leaders. And he was asked, how long do you expect the people, the citizens, to keep paying for these sanctions via their increased energy prices? And Biden says, as long as it takes. And then there were further comments from other people that said all of the people, the citizens, are behind these sanctions, and that everyone's behind it and they're willing to pay whatever it takes for energy. It doesn't matter what the price. Now, I would say that that is not accurate. I would say that if you were to ask the majority of people, yes, they feel some sympathy towards everything going on and the Ukrainian people. I think that's clear from the amount of Ukrainians that are now in Western countries and staying with families. There's obviously sympathy there. I have sympathy for civilians of any country that are affected by war. I think most people are. But it's when you get the mix of propaganda amongst all of this that causes the problems, and then to speak on behalf of everyone that says, as a citizen, I don't care if I'm living on the streets if it stops Putin's war machine. I just don't think that is true for every single citizen. So let's look at this then and look at a flow as to what this means and how it will lead to. Well, if you start reducing energy output, or if we say energy input to certain Western countries, it means that you have to get the energy from elsewhere. So if you don't want to pay Russia, you have to pay another country. And right now that is happening. We're buying energy from alternative places. Now, this energy is more expensive, meaning that it's pushing up the price of all sorts of things, from home heating to electricity generation to fuel for your vehicle to airline fuel as well. In fact, fuel now in the UK, just for petrol for a normal car, is £1.91 per litre. This equates to $8.78 as of today's rate in the USA per gallon. So you look at and imagine how bad it is for American citizens right now who are paying above $5 per gallon, some places even more. And then you look at the UK, which is paying almost $9 per gallon. What this has done is it's had a negative effect on travel and on people actually commuting to workplaces. The other thing this has done, of course, is restricted a lot of travel. So it baffles me the amount of people that believe all the airline chaos and all the trains chaos and the cars and the transport. All these things, these disruptions at the same time, thousands of flight cancellations, All these problems happening all at the same time. It amazes me people think this is a coincidence. So look at this logically. We have now this shortage of energy coming into the country. So we know there isn't enough energy, it's pushing up prices. And now all of a sudden we have all of this travel disruption all at the same time, which means that a lot of travel isn't taking place because we haven't got the energy anyway. What would have happened if the cancellations and the disruptions didn't take place? Does that mean that all of this travel would have happened? No, it couldn't have happened because there just isn't the energy there to even service everything, all of the transport. So what we're seeing is not a coincidence right now. Throughout all different sectors and industries, this is intentional. Now, what is the solution to all of this high inflation then that's coming through? Especially we have high energy inflation, we have high inflation as a result of quantitative easing and stimulus and currency creation and everything else. Well, if you listen to what Biden is talking about in the US, he's talking about government spending. We're going to do all of these infrastructure packages and we're going to do all this and this is going to help inflation. This is absolutely insane. This is absurd. Inflation is an expansion of the currency supply. So you've got the same amount of goods and services. In fact, we have less now because of all the closures and a lot of businesses that collapse. So we have less goods and services, but we have more currency as a result of all the new US dollars that were created in the last couple of years, chasing those goods and services. That is what inflation is. It's an expansion of the currency supply, or the monetary supply if you prefer. So going out and creating more currency for government projects. And people say, oh, it won't get into the economy. Of course it will. What do you think when the government actually creates this currency that ends up via the Federal Reserve, bonds, treasuries? So when they've got this currency and they pay it to contractors, who the contractors then buy materials and they pay their staff, of course this currency gets into the economy. I mean, I don't even understand how all these economists, some of them leading economists, are saying the currency won't get into the monetary supply. Of course it will. This is going to make inflation worse. You're basically taking a fire. Imagine there's a house on fire. The fire brigade turn up, and in their hoses, it's not water, it's gasoline. That's basically what you're doing. You're spraying gasoline all over this house and thinking it's going to put it out. It's not. It's going to make the situation worse. And this is why I keep disagreeing with so many economists who say, now we're going to see deflation. They've been saying this for 4 months, deflation now. And I've kept saying more inflation. And if they keep going with what they're doing, you're going to see even more inflation. You're also going to see on top of this, because of the energy inputs getting more expensive, you're going to see more inflation as a result of the energy input costs and material input costs as well. Of course, we now have this cost of living crisis, which is only going to get worse because, and I do support higher wages, just to be clear on this before I make my comments, I support higher wages. I think if inflation goes up 10%, wages should go up to meet that. Now, of course, the only people who don't agree are central bankers and politicians and the like. They think that, oh, it's the citizens that are causing the inflation by asking for higher wages. No, of course not. That is ridiculous, absurd. And yet they're the ones that are getting all these higher wages themselves. But there is a small part of this is known as employment scarring. So what actually happens then if you go out and strike and you ask for higher wages, which I support if the wages are reasonable, okay? If it's reasonable and it's fair, then obviously I support that. But what actually happens is then when you have to be paid more, it means the company has to charge more for the goods and services. And then what you end up with is this spiral. So it's known as employment scarring. So then what happens, those businesses might have to either drop their prices or they might have to lay off staff. And those staff, you are people who spend money into the economy. So this is how it works. It keeps dropping down. It's a negative cycle, as it were. And of course, as this happens and employment starts to rise, there's less money being spent in the businesses and it just keeps on repeating. So just to give you an example here of what I was talking about, this terrible media at the moment and how it's not news and propaganda, I was actually looking through because I was surprised that they were sort of featuring these Dutch farmers as right-wing, violent extremists and crazy things like that. And I was going through on the BBC website, see what are they saying, because I don't trust what the BBC says at the best of times. And rather than having something that's, you know, featured, that is either the earthquakes that are going on, the death tolls of all these events that are happening right now, or some really key important news. What was featured, number one, was a 16-year-old boy who dressed in a dress to go to prom. And I'm like, what the heck is this? And it makes me annoyed. I'll be honest with you. It makes me annoyed when I keep seeing all these stories and being pushed constantly at me and at you all the time, as if to say, you know, we have to accept all these things, and even if we don't agree with certain things, you know, this is the new normal. It's not the new normal. But unfortunately, so many people are accepting all of these things as if it is the new normal, that it's making it even worse. What was ranked number 14 then? It was a story on Sri Lanka mothers who couldn't get milk to feed their children. So think about that for a second. Number 14 was that story, and number 1 was a 16-year-old boy going to prom in a dress. You know, this is the world we're now living in. It's upside down, and all of these problems are just getting worse and worse and worse every single day that goes by. And I didn't even want to make this video today because just seeing all this news, it really just frustrated me and got me down, because there's all these problems going on in the world. There's all these, you know, lies as well that keep getting propagated. And yet there's people who have solutions to these problems. But the people who have solutions and the people who are very logical and rational and, you know, have a lot of solutions and ideas, they get silenced or they get cancelled. And this is worrying. It really is worrying. But that's all I'm going to say on it today. Thank you so much for watching the video. Take care. God bless. I will see you again tomorrow.